So, this happened about 5 years ago in my home state at around 3 PM. It had been storming all day, so it was fairly dark and creepy out. I drove out of my neighbourhood and was only a few blocks away when I stopped at a four-way intersection with all four sides having a stop sign. As I waited for two vehicles to cross the intersection, I was glancing at my phone to make sure I wasn't running late. Something caught my eye as the two cars passed each other. To my left and right were light woods with neighbourhoods behind them. I could see something bright red in the forest to my left. I looked up at my phone just as a very unkempt lady came rushing out of the tree line and lost her footing and fell face first and hard onto the cement road. I was next to go through the intersection, but knew I needed to make sure this lady was okay. I got out of my car and the first thing I noticed was that she hadn't moved at all since hitting the concrete. And two, that she was only wearing a light nightgown, with no shoes or socks, even though it was freezing and stormy. I walked slowly up to her and was repeating, "Ma'am, are you okay? Ma'am?" Without moving any other body part than her neck, she scraped her face against the concrete to crane her neck and make eye contact with me. She looked, the best word I can think of is crazy. She looked completely insane. As we made eye contact, she started pushing herself up with her arms. I was saying, "Ma'am, maybe don't move, I'm gonna call 911. Just stay put till they get here. You might have really hurt your head on that fall. Do you need something? I have a blanket in my car." She's struggling to get to her feet as I'm repeating this to her. I pull on my phone to dial 911, and as I do, she somehow finds her footing and is standing about 9 feet from me just staring. By now another car had pulled up behind me and was asking if we were okay. I turned to the driver to explain what was going on, and as I do, I can hear footsteps on the pavement. I look back towards the old lady, and she's charging at me as fast as she can. I make a little yelp noise and try talking to her again to calm her down and tell her that I was here to help. Her eyes made it obvious she had no idea what I was saying, and she started grabbing at my hair and clothes and pulling me towards the woods, saying inaudible things. The man in the other car got out and got us disconnected, and I ran to my car and locked the door. She was trying to get past him and back to me, but he finally got her to sit down. I could hear sirens in the distance. I rolled my window down and handed the man a bottle of water and a blanket and told him the sirens were for the lady. I told him I was freaked out and had to leave. I drove slowly past the man and seated lady through the intersection, and in my rearview mirror I could still see her staring at my car as I drove away. This happened about 3 years ago, and it is still one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me. For background, I live in a city of just over 100,000 people. Not huge, but it has a lot of suburbs on the edge of town. I live near downtown, but my friend lived right near the middle of one of these suburbs. I was leaving her house at around 11:30 at night, and while I can't remember what day of the week it was, I remember not being terribly worried about running into anyone. From her house to mine was about 8 miles, and I was driving an e-bike, which is kind of like an electric moped that can only go 20 miles per hour. Since the speed limit was usually 25 to 30 in the city, I was used to seeing cars speeding around me. It was no big deal. Anyway, I leave her place and start driving home. The first half of the trip is uneventful, but as you get closer to downtown, the neighbourhoods get rougher. Right around the halfway point, I parked in an intersection when I noticed a kind of beat up red Sunfire behind me. I thought it was a bit weird that they didn't pull up beside me, since cars at intersections usually did. I kept to the right side like any other cyclist would. But e-bikes were pretty new in my town at that point, so I figured they just didn't know how much space to give me. The light changes and I drive on, and it takes me another 2 blocks to realise the car's not passing me. This is where I realised things were weird. The car was trailing behind me only 20 or 30 feet, and was coasting at 20 miles per hour, despite the fact that there were no other cars anywhere on the road, so overtaking me would be easy. It was weirding me out, but I figured they would get bored and move on eventually. A couple miles later, I started heading into downtown, and sure enough, the car was still following me. I could only see them in my mirrors, but I could tell there were at least 2 people in the car. So, I was outnumbered too. I started to get worried as I got closer to home, realising that I'm going to have to stop eventually, and wondering what will happen when I do. My house, despite being near downtown, was on a quiet street that barely got any traffic, and wasn't very well lit. As I'm approaching a yellow light, I decide to risk running it to leave them behind at the red light. I turn left, only to be greeted by another red light. Thinking quick, I turn right on the red, but I can hear the squealing tyres as the first light turns green and the car circles around the block, the way I didn't go, to meet up with me. At this point, I'm facing the car on a side street, dead on. I have two choices: drive towards the car or turn left. The car's not moving, instead waiting for me to make a decision. I turn left, as is the way towards my house, and the car calmly turns to follow me. At this point, I'm losing it. Even though it's cold, and I'm shaking like mad, I take out my cell phone and call my boyfriend. I know, I should have called the police, but I was freaking out. I tell him he had better get his ass outside of our place right now, because there's no way I'm stopping alone. At the same time, I'm describing the make and model of the car as best I can, while also trying not to crash. When the people in the car realize I'm on the phone, they decide to overtake me. As they do, I look over to see two men, rough looking, probably in their 30s. They're laughing their heads off, not in a what a fun joke, but in a cruel way, like they're going to get me no matter what. It's absolutely terrifying. I figured they thought I was calling the cops, so I start to calm down. They're still going pretty slow ahead of me, but at least they aren't following me anymore. As I'm coming up to the street I live on, I make sure to wait till they pass the intersection before I put on my right blinker, and they put on theirs. I turn onto my street as the tires squeal again, turning onto the street one block up. I know that they can go faster than me, and I contemplate trying to find somewhere to hide. I decide against it. Sure enough, as I come to the first intersection, their car is sitting perpendicular to me, waiting for me to pass by so they can follow again. It seemed like it was some kind of hilarious, cruel game to them, watching me try to get away and knowing they could always go faster. As we approached my house, I saw my boyfriend standing on the lawn, arms crossed and leering at the car. He wasn't good for much, but I'm glad as hell he was there. I pulled into the driveway, and as the car was halfway into the driveway as well, they finally saw him. They were gone before I could even turn my bike off. So, creepy, nasty men who decided I'd be their fun game for the night. Let's not meet. Three of my friends and I drove to Breezewood as a staging ground for a nice nighttime tour of the abandoned PA Turnpike, a long underground tunnel that cuts through mountains. In the spirit of October, we decided to check it out late at night, so we set off from our hotel in Breezewood around 10:30 p.m. To get ourselves even more psyched up, I played creepy music along the way as we entered the dark forest. We arrived at the entrance of a trail that leads to a section of the Sidling Hill Tunnel about 15 minutes later. For the next hour and a half, it was mostly chill. We walked to the tunnel entrance, explored in a little side room, and overall messed around in the tunnel by laughing at the funny graffiti and taking cursed videos. When we reached the end of the tunnel, we spent maybe 10 minutes looking around for a way up to the ventilation room. We couldn't find a path outside, and the staircase leading up was destroyed. We turned around and began our long walk back, but within 5 minutes of backtracking, we noticed something when we all turned off our lights in the tunnel. A faint, shining light behind us. Out of what seemed to be sheer instinct, two of my friends started running. More of a jog than a sprint. Me and the other friend kept up. Eventually we slowed down and made our lights as dim as possible. At first, I was unsure of why we were being so paranoid, but one of my friends later pointed out how it's better to not take any chances of encountering someone past midnight in such a secluded area. What added to our suspicion was how the people, we assumed there was at least two, behind us were not only pursuing us, we could tell they were running by how their light was bouncing, but how they occasionally called out into the darkness of the tunnel, and how they occasionally blacked out like we did. A fast walk turned into a full-blown sprint after we eventually heard a very loud sound. It was a resonant metallic sound, like a huge gong being struck, which of course was amplified and reverberated by the tunnel's acoustics. Even while sprinting, I saw their light behind us bouncing up and down as if they too were running. We got out of the tunnel, shaken by what had happened, and reflected on how suspicious it was that they not only pursued us, but also turned off their lights from time to time. We were also confused about the source of what could only be described as a very loud gong. A friend jokingly brought up cultists, but I assumed they were just messing with some loose metal pipes. We all made it home safe, with no sign of them pursuing us outside of the tunnel, but I'm glad we didn't take the chance of trying to encounter them face to face. This happened a year ago. I live in New Mexico, and sometimes I have to drive to Texas for business. I'd always enjoyed driving around the state. It's a wide open spaces in between the pockets of civilization that dot the landscape. Right after the 4th of July holiday, I got a call to go to Texas on business. I made the drive a number of times before, and roughly 2 hours of it is through a very empty stretch of highway. It doesn't really have anything out there, beyond a tiny little town, complete with post office, gas station, mum and pop store connected to it, a few trailers that look abandoned. It's one of those blink and you'll miss it places. I'd usually stop there for a coffee and a bathroom break whenever I had to make that particular drive, and this morning was no different. When I spotted the gas pumps and store in the distance, I pulled off the highway to their tiny gravel parking lot on the south side of the store. The layout of the place is the pumps are in the front, store behind them, and there's a small parking lot for customers on the south side, a dirt road running past the north side of the store, and a parking lot in the back that I'd glimpsed before when driving by that usually had a few cars, presumably belonging to whoever worked there. This is important to the story, bear with me. Anyways, I pulled into the parking lot on the south side, which was completely empty. I remember thinking this was a good thing, because usually the place was packed and I was in a bit of a hurry. For a moment I wondered if they were closed, but I'd been there on that same day of the week plenty of times, and the neon sign, "We're open," was lit up, so I got out of the car. My first clue something wasn't right was when I nearly tripped over a small stack of beer cans. The parking lot was in fact strewn with the type of trash one sees from parties: chip bags, food wrappers, disposable cups, and lots of beer cans. I thought that was strange, because every other time I'd been there the place was neat, clean to the point of near OCD even. But the pumps in the entrance to the store looked as shiny as ever, so I told myself it was probably just they'd had a 4th of July party there and no one had cleaned up yet. I started to walk towards the store, but about halfway there something made me stop and look around. I got a really strong sensation of being watched, but I didn't see anyone. In fact, I realized that was part of the problem. The whole place felt deserted and still. I didn't remember it being so dead any other time I'd been there, especially on a weekday morning. For a moment I wavered. Should I go ahead and go up to the door, just to check it out, or walk back to my car and forget the whole thing? I'm sort of paranoid anyways, and something about the whole thing just felt off. But then the lure of coffee, they had good coffee, and a bathroom made me push that uneasiness aside as I kept walking forwards. I was nearly to the door when I heard the unmistakable crunch of gravel under tyres coming from the north side of the store, just out of my line of sight. The noise startled me because it was so quiet that the sound might as well have been a gunshot going off. Dead silent 1 minute, then that sound the truck makes if you have to push it to start on the gravel road and it's rolling forward. I was pretty sure I heard footsteps briefly as well. The hair stood up on my arms and I decided I'd had it. I was noping out of there. I had maybe 5 feet left to get into my car when this big ass black pickup truck with 2 guys in it rolled out far enough beyond the wall where I could see them. Mind you, they weren't on the dirt road, which would have made sense, but right up against the side of the store itself. I saw them staring at the front door. Then the one in the passenger seat caught sight of me and said something to the driver, pointing at me. They looked surprised, as if they'd been expecting me to be at the door or maybe inside by now. Something else to note, the north side of the building is much closer to the entrance of the store than the south end. When they saw me backing away, back to my vehicle, only then did they start up the engine to their truck. I waved, hoping they were friendly, but instead I got nothing but cold stares. Not friendly or hostile, just staring at me, while the one in the passenger seat kept talking to the driver who wasn't moving. At that point I dropped all pretense of not being scared and bolted the rest of the way to my car, jumping in and locking the doors before pulling out a knife I carried in my glove compartment for self-defense. There were no other stores nearby, a few abandoned trailers, the post office was up the road and so tiny that it wouldn't be shelter anyways, even if a mail carrier was there. If they decided to come after me, I had nowhere and no one to run to, and the nearest town was over an hour away. I started the car up, backed up, and moved to pull out onto the highway, quietly freaking out. Because I was in a car that would likely not be able to outrun or outmaneuver them if they had decided to come after me. I paused at the entrance of the highway to see what they were doing and my heart sank. They'd also pulled up to the highway as if to get on it, but they were just sitting there, not moving, even though they could have pulled it out before me and been well on their way, since they didn't have to back up and turn around first like I had. I'm not sure what would have happened next, but I spotted an 18-wheeler coming down the highway towards us going my direction. No sight has ever been more welcome than that beautiful shiny rig. The guys were so intent on watching me, I don't think they saw it in time to plan a counter-move to what I did next. I waited until it was close to them, but still with enough distance for me to get in front of the rig without causing him to slam on his brakes, and then I peeled out onto the highway. I looked back in the mirror and they were still sitting there, with the driver now flipping me the bird. But they didn't follow, quite possibly since they knew that there was now at least one other vehicle on the road who could come to my aid if needed. After that, I didn't let off the gas until I hit the next town. I called the state patrol for that area to file a report for suspicious activity, and they told me the gas station and store had been closed for a couple of months. They said they'd check it out, but I never heard back. To this day, I wonder what would have happened if I just kept going up to that door. If I had, I'd have been either in the store if the door was unlocked, or right at the door where they'd have easily been able to jump out and block any escape, or chase me down before I could get into my car. It felt like I'd escaped a near ambush, and to this day I hate to think what might have happened if I'd been paying less attention. This happened a few years ago when I was 21 and had to travel by bus regularly. It was a normal day. I left my home, took the bus down to the city, and waited at the bus station for my next bus. Suddenly, a girl greeted me. She was cute, so I thought I may be lucky. I greeted her back. She asked if my name was James, which was pretty confusing and scary. I said yes, probably already with some confusion in my voice because she giggled. She asked if I took that bus often, how long the travel was, where I lived, and all kinds of weird stuff. What struck me as odd was how quickly she just nodded and moved on to another question. My younger self thought maybe she was just in a rush, or the kind of weirdo who talks fast. I even forgot during all these questions that she knew my name already, but never told me hers. When the bus finally arrived, she said goodbye and just left. Didn't even take the same bus, which I realized after sitting down. Suddenly the weirdness struck me again, and I realized how she asked in a way that seems more like checking a list instead of learning something new. A few days later I met my best friend, and he was stressed, so I asked him what was going on. I knew he had some trouble with his parents, so I thought it was maybe something along those lines. He told me instead that his ex had turned into a stalker. He never gave her a key, yet she suddenly stood in his flat when he got home from work. She messaged and phoned his parents in order to get an explanation, to talk to him, to accuse him of talking him into a breakup. She also visited him during work and made a scene, his boss being the person throwing her out of the building and threatening to call the police. I remembered the girl from the bus station. I described her even though I could only vaguely remember what she looked like, and he nodded and told me it was her while going pale. I asked how she knew me and why she wanted to talk to me, to which he couldn't answer. She knew my name because he talked about me once, but he never told her more than that. We didn't learn how she learned so much about me, and we never wanted to because he had it harder than me. He got terrorized at home by her, which drove him to the decision to finally call the police and get a restraining order. We never again talked about the situation because it was just so creepy. The reason they broke up was her accusing him over and over again of cheating. She was the one breaking up, but also seemed to go mental at the same time. Before we begin, let me give you a little description about myself. I'm a 20-year-old college student who's been back home for the summer. I also happen to be extremely small, 4'11" to be exact, 105 pounds, and a serious case of noodle arms, literally zero muscle. Now let's get to the story. Last night at around 8:30 PM, I was walking the dogs with my mum. We have two dogs, Daisy and Major. Daisy is our senior. She's 13 years old and has bad arthritis because her torso is too heavy for her stubby legs. We make it a point not to take her on long walks anymore because of this. So before we even made it to the main street, Daisy goes to the bathroom right away. I tell my mum she can go ahead and go back home while I take Major for me for a longer walk. My mum was hesitant about this at first. She refused. However, I know my mum has some work she has to get back to. Eventually, I convince her to just go back. I said that it's just a short walk, and I have our German Shepherd mix, Major, to protect me. Finally, she agrees to go back, but tells me to be careful, and to make sure no one is following me. A little bit weird and specific, but I agree nonetheless. Now, I should add that I didn't have my phone with me at the time. It was about to die before our walk, so I just let it charge at home. Still, I was confident, because I've walked the dogs on this street numerous times before. I never had an issue. From there, I turned left from the street we live on onto the main road. This made it so the traffic going the opposite direction would be closest to me. Every building on the main street is some sort of doctor's office. All of them are closed at this time and the parking lots are all empty. I walked for a bit on the left side before deciding to cross over to the right side of the street, where the dental office is, which was past the vet. Before I could do that though, there was a car approaching on my side of the street, so I patiently waited for him to pass before walking across. As I'm walking across, I take note that the car that passes me is red, and I stop just before the dentist parking lot. Usually, I go behind the dentist's office, but last night I hesitated, and after a full minute of major sniffing at nothing of interest, I decided against it and walked past, opting to go the long way back home instead. Not 30 seconds after I decided not to walk that direction, a car pulls into one of the two entrances of the dentist parking lot and parks in a parking spot. I'd never seen anybody pull into that parking lot on this street so late at night before, so I'm immediately suspicious and I stare back behind me. I was checking to make sure that it wasn't that same red car from a minute ago. Another 30 seconds goes by and the car pulls out from the parking space and jerks back to the other entrance, the one closer to me. It then pulls just out far enough for me to see that it is in fact the same red car. I still couldn't conclude that he was following me just yet, so I remained calm and kept staring as I continued to walk away so he'd know that I was aware of his presence. Just before the end of the block I'm on, I pull Major and I off the sidewalk. That's when the car swerves from the lot and beelines towards where I was. So I pull us even further away from the sidewalk and behind a tree that Major decides to mark, completely oblivious. The red car was about to pass me when it begins to slow its pace where Major and I am. I was still standing behind the tree, glaring at the car through the branches. The car eventually moved past me instead of coming to a complete stop where I was. I take the initiative to immediately change my trajectory and walk back the way I came, tugging Major's leash with urgency. My hope of him simply continuing down the street died when he immediately took a hard left and swerved into the parking lot across from me. He noticeably accelerates across the lot as he turned his car to face the main street with his headlights on me. By now, my adrenaline had kicked in, and I became extremely upset and flushed to show for it. Not only was he following me, but now he was driving erratically, and it was starting to scare the living shit out of me. Keep in mind that there is nobody else driving on the main street. I thought that I was effectively alone until I see a silhouette walking towards me on my side of the street. I couldn't be sure because it was so dark out, but I thought it could be my mum. She has a short stature like me, but it was hard to tell from a distance. If not her, it could be someone taking a walk. If not that, it could be someone on foot to trap me. Even so, I continued walking towards them to see if it really was her. Just then, the car accelerates again and pulls into a parking lot adjacent to the one he was just in. I start quickening my pace when finally the vet's lights flicker on and illuminate my mum's face just enough for me to recognize her. "Mum?" I call out as I quickly turn my head again to watch the red car repeat its pattern of turning into the next lot and facing themselves towards the street, now occupied by me and my mum. "Yes, it's me," she reassured, although distracted. She too was eyeing the strange red vehicle as she waited for me to catch up with her. I was a little dismayed to see that she didn't seem to be carrying her phone with her. Nonetheless, when I got an earshot on my mum, I vehemently stated that there was a fucking maniac loose. To my surprise, my mum says, "I know." The man was about to repeat his crazed cycle when I finally get to see what he looks like. He must have put down his window at some point, because I could see his side profile as he drove his car an inch away from the street once more. Except he wasn't looking at us. The curly-bearded bald man was looking at his car dash as weird beeping noises emanated from his car. I had to actively fight the urge not to yell at the man to get lost. The driver became even more erratic. He pulled into the next parking lot and pulled out just as quick into another lot on the next block. We took that opportunity to cross the street back towards our house, but that also brought us closer to him. He must not have expected us to cross though, because he drove far enough ahead to allow us to pass him from behind. This gave us a good view of his bumper as he paused in the middle of the lot. That was the last place we saw him. We're now in the home stretch. I wasn't looking back as often at this point. I just wanted to get home. My mum, however, said she saw him turn around again to face our street. He may have kept watching us from there, but we have no way of knowing for sure. My mum then explained to me that when she got Daisy back inside, she told my stepdad to feed her because she had to run back outside to get me. She said the whole time she walked back home, she couldn't shake this bad feeling about me. She just had to go back out and make sure I was okay. Then she got to see for herself how this deranged driver was swerving in and out of lots behind and across from me. Once we made it home, we reported the incident to the police. We gave his license plate number and described what happened. Dispatcher even commented on how strange it was. I don't want to know what that guy was thinking. I'm just so happy that my mum had the crazy intuition to find me. I don't know what I would have done to get myself home otherwise. The rest of that night I spent awake wondering what I could have done better in that situation. I was afraid that if I had tried to run, it would have provoked him. If he had tried to chase me, there would have been no way to outrun him. I wonder what would have happened had I gone behind the dentist's office before I decided not to. I don't like thinking about it. My mum thinks the noises coming from his car was some sort of police radio. That's another terrifying thought. So hey, creepy arsehole. If you happen to be reading this, let's not ever meet again. Around 2 years ago, my fiancée, another couple, we'll call them Dane and Shelley, and I were driving around a deserted country roads late at night looking for haunted places to play around at. We were travelling from one spot to another, and there was a spot in the road that forked into a Y shape. There was a minivan coming towards us, on the part of the fork we were turning towards. Suddenly, they turned around at the fork and came up behind us. I'm a paranoid person, so it really freaked me out. I told my fiancée to skip going to the next haunted spot, and to just drive. Dane and my fiancée were kind of peeved, but Shelley agreed with me. The car was so close to us that if we braked, they wouldn't have had time to stop. We started speeding down the gravel roads, and they stayed right behind us. We drove in circles, and they still stayed on our rear. My fiancé got the fantastic idea to turn a corner sharply, turn out his lights, and park on the side of the road. They'd been so close behind us it's very easy to see that we had turned, so they turned with us and parked behind us. At this point, I'm really freaking out. Shelley and I are trying to tell my fiancé to drive. He keeps saying stuff like, "It's okay girls, if they try anything, Dane and I can take them." Then, the people in the minivan start shining flashlights into the back windows of our car. That finally freaks my fiancé enough to take off, and the van takes off with us. Shelley pulls out her phone and calls 911, and they basically told us to get onto a public road and don't stop for anything, and to call them back if they keep following us. Now, Shelley has one of those massive iPhones with a really bright backlight, and they had to have seen her pull out her phone. Not long after the light of her phone lit up the car, they turned onto a random road. We got onto the highway and went back home. Ever since that, I've been really worried about driving around the country at night. I'm a female in her late 20s, and this happened fairly recently. Nothing bad happened to me, but I'm lucky it didn't, and it easily could have. There's a conservation area that I used to like to walk in regularly. It's beside a golf course, near an ordinary subdivision, just off a busy road. It's popular with dog walkers and photographers. The conservation area is fairly well maintained, and alerts its users that there are hidden cameras everywhere. My point in bringing attention to all of this is to say that by all accounts, this is a very safe, vanilla, urban wooded area in a populated area. One big thing about me is that I like isolation to recharge. I dislike crowded trails, and by convention, go in off-peak hours or when the weather is unpleasant. Not dangerous, but unpleasant, too cold, lightly raining, foggy, etc. I stay safe, but I like there to be as few people around as possible. In a city, in daylight, I don't feel like I'm taking any risks by doing this. The first encounter. There was one day when I went at around 4 PM or so on a frigid, rainy Monday in November. On days like that, there may be only one or two dog walkers, but today there was no car in the parking lot except for a dirty blue pickup truck with a man sitting in it. I noticed that he was looking at me, but that didn't really bother me. I was just happy to see the trail was empty. On this particular day, I went to the area to practice my navigation skills. I was learning how to use a compass at that time, and it's good to practice that skill in an area that you won't get lost in. So, I decided to go off-trail to a big pine plantation, which is a big open area with large mature pine trees, if you're not familiar. It's not a hiking area, or really that interesting in any way, and definitely off-trail. You wouldn't get there unless you really wanted to get there. So, I picked my first landmark and sighted it using my compass, and I'm pacing towards it. I find myself about halfway there when I hear rustling through bushes, and I turn around to see the man from the dirty blue pickup truck there, entering the pine plantation. Mid-50s white man, a little pudgy, wearing a baggy beige cardigan and blue slacks. I feel pretty alert at this point. Feels out of place somehow. I take note, but pretend to keep walking around with my compass because I don't want to seem weird. I look at him, he pretends to ignore me. I'm getting a really bad gut feeling about the situation for some reason at this point, and I feel like he's following me. But I have an anxiety disorder, so I try not to freak out for zero reason, and I don't want to ruin my relaxation time. It's just a guy walking around, no big deal. To see if he's following me, I pivot 180 degrees and walk directly back to the trail. He's still following me. I walk through the bushes, onto the trail, still following me. At this point I was freaked out. The pine plantation entrance is only about 50 feet onto the trail, so this guy would have walked 50 feet, entered the pine plantation, then decided that was it for the day. Bad odds, definitely following me. I quickly exit the trail, and when I'm leaving the parking lot, I see that he's still looking at me. I take the long way home. The experience freaks me out, and I only visit the area once before the second encounter. This time it was January. This time, I want to go bird watching. A week prior, I had seen an owl in the same pine plantation. I was practicing navigation again, and I wanted to see it again. I'd seen it about an hour before sundown, so I figured that was a good time to try and see it again in the same area. I checked the parking lot and there was no blue pickup truck, but there were 2 other cars with men. One was a red sedan with heavily tinted windows, and it looked like the other one was empty. So, I go on the trail again. Today's muddy, wet, cold. Area should be totally empty. Good. Unfortunately, not so. About 20 feet on the trail, I hear footsteps behind me. I don't like when people walk behind me, but it's not a crime, and I'll lose them as soon as I go into the pine plantation. I'm sure you know where this is going. When I walk onto the pine plantation, there's the same rustling in the bushes as before, and when I turn around, I see the same man from before. I feel a wave of terror and dread come over me, alone in a muddy forest with a possible stalker. But it's still so calm, and it feels so mundane. To confirm my fears, I walk over to the area where I saw the owl last week and pause to look for it. Who do I see next to me is the same freaking guy from before. I'm terrified at this point, and every part of me is screaming run, so I walk as fast as I can to the trail again. I pass some other random guy in the same pine plantation and smile at him, just totally on autopilot. He smiles back. It wasn't until I was in the parking lot where I get freaked out that there was a second person in the same pine plantation. Could they have been connected somehow? I stop briefly in the parking lot and take out a small notepad to quickly write down the license plates of the 2 cars. This gives the original man time to catch up to the parking lot. I'm booking it out on foot to the parking lot, and he yells towards me, "Can I give you a ride?" And I just shake my head and keep walking. As I walk away, he begins to follow me in his car. He waits at the intersection to see which direction I'm going in, and I decide to walk in a busy park to lose him. He pulls into a nearby hidden driveway and stares at me, and takes out his phone to presumably take a photo of me. He notes what direction I'm walking in, then does a U-turn and drives fast the other way. I took the long way home, filled out a police report, and the police opened an investigation on it. I've not gone back to the conservation area since, and the experience has definitely left me with an ongoing nervousness about being alone. Doubly more because I do not know who the second guy is. I passed him so quickly I only know that he was in his mid-50s and had glasses, and was bald. The police unfortunately told me there's nothing they can really do at this point, so the best I can do is stay vigilant and try not to let it freak me out too much. Unfortunately, this has totally ruined my love for going out into the wilderness alone. Nothing bad happened, but I think that was more because I was able to escape and lose him, or them, before anything did. To the random 2 almost stalkers, let's not meet. Gonna preface this by saying I was incredibly naive. My best friend, Jay, used to work at a restaurant in a very bad area. She'd moved there from our little suburb about 35 minutes away. I still lived in the suburb with my parents, so my street smarts weren't the best. This was 3 years ago. I was 19 at the time, so driving around to visit friends is one of my favourite pastimes. One day, I decided to stop by the restaurant to see Jay, as I'd done a few times before, and I was friends with all of her co-workers. My friend was busy at the time, and she made me wait around with a few of the others for a bit until her break, then came out to chat with me. At this time, I was very anti-purse and just kept a wristlet, like a little wallet you keep around your wrist. After chatting for about 30 minutes, I left the restaurant and walked back to my car. After driving for a while, I noticed I'd left my wallet, so I texted Jay telling her to grab it for me and where I'd probably left it. I knew there was a possibility that it was gone, being that I'd left it at a busy restaurant in the city centre, and Jay confirmed it was indeed gone. My dad cancelled all the credit cards, but I was still holding on to the hope that it'd be returned, as it did have my ID in there. The next day, I got a text from Jay. She told me someone called the restaurant and said they had my wallet and that she'd given them my number. I was really happy about this, but knew I would have to meet up with a stranger, so I decided not to tell my parents. I didn't get a text until the next morning. The person said they had my wallet and wanted to give it back, but never gave a name or a description. I didn't care. I thanked them profusely and asked them when I could meet. Hours later, they replied with an address and told me to stop by around 9 PM. The address was about 20 minutes from the restaurant, which was also a really bad area, but that wasn't a worry for me, as I had left my wallet right around there. I get there around 9, and this is when I start to get freaked out. The house looked like it was previously a row home, but the one connecting it to the rest had been demolished. The windows were boarded up, and there were no lights coming from inside. The place was obviously abandoned, grass overgrown, weeds everywhere, graffiti all over it. Get the idea. The door, however, was not boarded up, and I could see it was ajar. I texted the number, and the person replied a second later telling me to come in. It was early summer, so while it wasn't completely dark out, it was getting there, and I would have needed a flashlight to see. So what do? Well, I turn on my flashlight, of course. I get out of the car and look around in hopes of seeing someone. Nothing. So, with phone flashlight in hand, I start walking up the dry-rotted wooden steps of the front door. I crack the door open further. It's completely black, and when I shine my flashlight around, I can see there's no furniture. I thought I heard some quiet creaking from upstairs, which I thought was strange. Why would the person text me to come in but then be hiding upstairs? At this point, I knew there was something wrong here. I was scared as hell, and I hightailed it back to my car. I should have pulled around the corner, but I didn't. I just called the police right there. 2 policemen arrived shortly after and walked right into the house with flashlights, then 2 more pull up. They were inside for a long time, then they came out. With them, in handcuffs, are 2 skinny, scraggly, homeless-looking guys. I only got a good look at one, but I do remember the guy had visible sores on his face and arms. I assume they could have been drug-related. As the cops walked them by my car, one of the guys looked at me with the angriest expression I'd ever seen. 2 of the officers came over to talk to me, and had indeed found my wallet inside. All the money was gone, but the rest was intact. The cops reprimanded me for being so stupid. I drove home and never spoke of it to my parents. Only recently have I told them what happened. I'll never know what those guys were planning. Was it just someone messing with me, and I called the cops on 2 random homeless guys living there? I never got another text from that number. I started carrying my purse after that. Gross, creepy, abandoned housemen. Let's never meet again. Ever. So, for the past year or so, I've been dating my boyfriend who lives a ways into town from my rural house. My parents just recently moved out to this super rural, nice but spread out neighbourhood about 15 minutes from the rest of our city and 30 minutes for the more urban part of the city, with more restaurants, movie theatre, etc. I was working over the summer at a restaurant in this mall area where I often got off work at around 6. I would go to hang out at my boyfriend's at night until midnight, as I'm in college and I can get away with it. One night, my boyfriend and I accidentally fell asleep mid-movie viewing, and I woke up at around 1:30 AM. I desperately needed gas before driving home, so I hauled butt out of my boyfriend's house and stopped briefly at a gas station to fill up. Thank goodness, or the story would be a lot scarier. Before I headed home. I knew I was stupid for being out so late, being a short girl in my 20s, but there was no real option. I got back on the highway from the gas station turnout and headed for the boonies where my house was. So, I should note here that the highway leading to the boonies where my house was narrows in the space of a few signals from 3 lanes to 1. It was fairly common to get oblivious out-of-towners going 30 miles per hour in a 50 zone on the 15-minute drive out to my house. So, I have a tendency of being semi-unflinching when it comes to passing people where the lanes taper down to 1 if they're going a few miles below the speed limit on the highway. In this case, I pulled up to a red light next to this nice white car. I think it was an Audi or a Lexus, but I can't remember. But definitely not sketchy looking or anything to me. I passed them as the lane slowly combined over the course of a few blocks as we headed into country from suburbia, because they were going about 10 miles below the speed limit on the highway. It wasn't as if I was driving aggressively, I simply happened to pass them in the second lane a few blocks before it merged into one. Anyway, I pull up to the right turn out of the middle of nowhere where I live, a long country road that basically has a bunch of random estates and horse properties. I sit at the last red light before rural roads, and the white car stops behind me. The only car on the road, which isn't necessarily strange, but it's a weekday and super late in a bedroom community. The light turns green and I drive out for about a mile, then turn left to head out on the one-lane rural road leading to my far-out neighbourhood. I'm going about 10 miles above the speed limit, about 50 miles per hour, the whole way, because I'm tired and I want to get home. And the whole time I'm watching the lone white car in my rear view, because I'm bored and I know this road like the back of my hand. He keeps slowing down to maybe 10 miles per hour slower, and then wandering over the white line in the middle of the road, then speeding up at the points in the road where he could pass me with brakes in the line, to literally tailgate me at miles above the speed limit. I thought maybe he was drunk or something, again, totally possible on a weeknight. But instead of passing me while he rides my ass every time, he could have just gone by. He simply gets super close to my bumper in these areas. I'm starting to get annoyed and about 10 minutes of this goes by, and I pass the first of 3 entrances to my super rural neighbourhood. Now I'm starting to get a little weirded out, because whenever someone lives this far out, they tend to turn into this first entrance about 90% of the time. White car continues to follow me, and I kinda start to speed up because I'm weirded out when he doesn't turn in. I get to the third entrance with him still behind me, and swing a left at semi-dangerous speeds and without any turn signal, because I figure I'll lose him around the curve and haul ass up the super steep, twisty hill towards my house. I think I'm good, until I look in my rear view and he's still about 10 yards behind me, no turn signal either. So, I fucking slam the pedal down going up the hill to my house, which is about a half mile or so long and insanely twisty. I'm basically counting on the unlikeliness of my fellow neighbours to be out this late as I book at about 20 miles above the normal speed. I've got water bottles and stuff flying around the back seat. I'm freaking myself out a little with the speed, but this guy is still right there behind me. I get to the left turn from my street and this guy is still glued to my tail. I'm starting to freak out and dialing my boyfriend on my cell as I make a snap decision not to turn into my driveway. It would be a solid 20-foot run to my front door, and I imagine it would be hard to get in the door in a panic in the country darkness. I always go on runs about the neighbourhood, so I know the roads well and past my house, turning right to head even further out into the country. The white car follows me still, as I'm careening around unevenly paved, hilly roads at about 50 miles per hour. I keep going straight, even as the road turns into a super uneven, unpaved dirt hill ahead, because I know it loops back to my street eventually. The second I hit the dirt road at about 50 miles per hour, my sturdy SUV starts lurching, but holding steady as I haul ass up the dirt hill, while yelling at my boyfriend that someone's following me. Luckily, the white car's headlights completely disappeared behind me, and I sped away and up to the right. I'm staring in my rear view the whole time while I shout to my boyfriend about how this guy followed me for 15 minutes in the middle of nowhere and then just disappeared. I have to assume the creeper was scared off by the dirt road overtaking the paved one, as the car he was driving was a really nice little city car that couldn't have handled the dirt roads at that speed. I ended up getting home without seeing his car again behind me, but I couldn't sleep for hours that night. I woke my mum up in a panic and she told me I shouldn't come home so late and that I should drive to a police station or something, but I was dumb and didn't realise. Also, I thought it was illegal to call the cops while driving because our state has a law against using cell phones while a vehicle is in motion. But yeah, it definitely reminded me of that advice where they say if you suspect you're being followed, keep turning right, because if he keeps following you, there's no question that they're actually following you in a circle. This happened within the last 24 hours. I live in a large city in the US. Like many people, I've taken it on myself to try and get back in shape during the New Year's, so I've recently gotten into running and lifting 5 days a week. Yesterday was a run day for me. I usually start at my apartment and cross over to this long park that runs the river close to my apartment. The park is filled with sports fields, tennis courts and many runners along the pathway. I've been going 2 to 3 times a week for just over a month. I was on my run last night, listening to a podcast, minding my own business, and decided to go a little further than I normally do, to this longer stretch where the park sorta ends for like half a mile before it picks back up again. Kind of an area where they park equipment, but many people avoid this area due to it not being waterfront and it being a bit ugly. I decided to run to the end of this area before circling back home. As I'm running, I see a man 200 or so feet ahead of me walking in my direction. Not unusual at all. I've passed like 40 people already. But this area is empty except for him and I, as most people circle back. Still, I ride my bike here to commute for work and have never gotten weird vibes. I'm also an average built man and feel pretty secure most places in my relatively safe neighbourhood. I keep running, listening to my podcast, when I notice the man's path is directly in line with mine. As in, if I continue 150 more feet, I'd run into him. So I shift to the other side of the path, 10 or so feet, and keep running, not paying attention. Looking back up, I see he's in my path again. Still no alarms. Maybe he shifted to get out of my way, and we did that thing where we both went. So I shift back to the side I started on. I watch him. He shifts back to my side. I'm thinking this guy is fucking with me. I'm 50 feet away, and between there and 20 feet, I keep shifting more and more quickly. He follows me exactly to the point he is sidestepping instead of moving forward, waiting for me to reach him. At this point, I take his presence in. He's 6'3" at the shortest, in jeans and a black hoodie, with the hood up. I can't really make out his face due to street light behind him, casting a shadow. I begin to realize, oh fuck. I come to a stop and go to pull my headphones out and begin the sentence, "What the fuck, man?" I get to "what the" when he raises both arms above his head and begins to scream at me. No legible words I can hear over my podcast. I do notice that he has something long and white in his hands. At this point, I begin to backtrack, keeping eyes on him. All of a sudden, he dashes towards me, running with his arms stretched out to grab me. I turn and hightail it the other way. It should be known that I'm not in the best of shape. I've had numerous injuries requiring surgeries, and I've just done about 75% of my intended run for the night, but I've never ran faster. He kept pace and closed much of the distance, but when we started going slightly uphill, I continued to make ground. We came to a fork in the path after about a minute of this. The two paths circled around a fenced-in area that contained construction vehicles, mowers, etc. I made it look like I was going one way and at the last moment dashed the other. The paths kind of made a circle, so I was able to get far enough ahead to where he couldn't see me by the fence and bushes, and when I felt like it was my chance, I dove into a bush, clawed my way under the fence, and crawled through the space out to the other side of the fence. He kept looking for me in the bushes, prowling back and forth, and finally saw me on the other side of the enclosure. At this point, I was already on the phone with the police, trying to get help as I gulped down breaths of fresh air. I was also warning runners. He eventually just followed my pace on the opposite side of the fence. He kept ducking into dark areas around the enclosure, and eventually I lost sight of him. I began getting worried again, and kept wandering around, warning people while I waited on the cops. After about 15 minutes of not seeing him, I pieced the fuck out of there as the cops said they were close. The jog home was horrible, and any time a runner passed me, I would have a mini panic attack. I was in shock, and running off adrenaline the remainder of the night. I'm not really sure what happened or what was going on. It felt like it was from a movie. Today, I checked the Citizen app and Twitter to see if anything had happened, and I'm not sure if it's related, most likely isn't. But 5 hours after I called the cops, they pulled the body of a man out of the river a mile or two downriver from where the attempted attack occurred. Let's not meet. When I was about 7 years old, my father bought a few hundred acres in southern Mississippi about 1.5 hours west of Mobile, Alabama. He built a small cabin on top of a hill that was in the middle of a large field surrounded by woods. This house was about 5 miles from a paved road. To get to our land, it took nearly 10 minutes of driving down dirt roads from the main highway, which was south of the house. About a quarter mile north from the house, he built a small lake, more like a pond. It was about as long as a football field, but wider. To get to the lake from the house, you could take Route A, which was a hard-packed dirt road that was lined with dogwood trees. It was beautiful in the spring. Route B was about 100 yards east of the dogwood lane, and we named it Vampire Trail because it was always so gloomy. The trees blocked out the sun on the brightest days, and it had a slight decline as you walked towards the lake. I say walked because this trail was not for vehicles. Thick woods filled the area outside and in between both trails. One morning during the fall, my parents and my little sister had gone to get ice cream and do some shopping. This trip would take them at least an hour or two. I was 10 years old, so I decided to go fishing while listening to Barmer play Ole Miss. The game was the usual Barmer win, so I thought I could ease the boredom of a blowout by fishing in the well-stocked lake. So, I carried my pole, small radio, and my small ice chest. I had an Airedale Terrier named Bully that never left my side, and it was on this day I realized how awesome he really was. Onto the lake we went. Picture a large oval, roughly the size of a football field, but larger with an L-shaped pier on the southeast corner. Vampire Lane opened up to a more severe decline to the shore, and then a small pier. Across the lake on the west side, there was a narrow tree line that separated the shore from Dogwood Lane. The north side of the lake was the dam, and the south ended in thick and swampy woods. Fortunate for me, I realized later. About 5 minutes after I threw out my line, and 2 Barmer touchdowns later, I got that feeling. Bully must have felt it too, because a few seconds later, I could hear him growling low and staring across the lake to the west, to the tree line that separated Dogwood Lane from the lake. I turned my head in that direction and almost immediately my eyes lit on what I thought to be a half silhouette of a large man behind a tree. It was too far to make out details, but close enough to be sure of what I was seeing. Almost 5 minutes went by, and right before I scolded myself for an overactive imagination, the half silhouette moved behind a tree slowly. Bully stood and growled louder, and I told him quietly to stop, and I turned my head north towards the dam, while keeping my eyes and attention rooted to that tree. Over the next 10 minutes, which felt like hours, I watched, while this figure moved slowly from tree to tree, always north and always facing me. The saying "scared stiff" was something I found to be true. For some reason, I thought it important that whoever it was did not know I was aware. I finally realized that the figure's path was bringing them closer to the dam, which would make their path to me shorter and easier. My paralysis broke, and I casually put down the fishing pole and started walking towards Vampire Lane. As an adult, I was in the army for 11 years as an MP, but not turning to look over my shoulder during that walk was the hardest thing I've ever done. In my mind's eye, whoever it was screaming across the dam towards me. When I hit the tree line, I broke into a run. As I was running, Bully dashed ahead of me, and my anger turned into admiration as he stopped just some 20 yards ahead and faced north until I passed him. He continued this action the entire run home. My dog was watching my back. Although I can grasp the awesomeness of this now, at the time I was so scared that I was literally sick. Even at such a young age, I knew that a large man watching and trying to creep up on a 10-year-old boy was up to no good. When I reached the cabin, I immediately locked the door and got one of my dad's shotguns as well as his .38 revolver. I sat at the large front window, my eyes glued to both the trail openings and the woods between them. My family returned shortly after, and for some reason I did not mention what happened. I never felt safe there again. When me and my friends and my little sister wanted to go anywhere other than the area around the cabin, I made sure my parents were with us. What scares me the most, though, is the fact that our closest neighbours were about 2 miles northwest of us, with thick woods in between as the crow flies. Who the hell was watching me from the woods that day? Guess I may never know. I sometimes wish I could go back then, as a grown man with military training, as I am now. Bully lived a full life and was put to sleep peacefully as a very old but great dog, the best dog I've ever known. This just happened to me tonight. As soon as I got on the bus, I noticed this guy sitting in the front seat. Seemed like a normal dude, nothing odd at first, like he just finished a long day at work. When I find a seat by the window near the back, that same guy moves to a seat behind me, which gives him a clear view of me. I was wondering why, but I gave him the benefit of the doubt. However, there was something about this entire situation that just didn't seem right to me, so I began watching him from the reflection on the window. I see that he's staring at me, and when I look in his direction, he looks away. Okay. He then proceeds to look out the window, rummage through his bags, drink some Gatorade, and apply some Vaseline onto his hands, basically trying to come off as inconspicuous as possible. Yet there was something about the way his feet were positioned, how he was constantly doing something, and obviously him looking at me, that didn't sit right with me. The stop I was planning on getting off at is a really quiet part of the city, and I'd have to walk a while to get to my destination. With businesses already closed, there'd be nobody around besides cars zooming by. So, at the very last minute, I decided to get off in a much more busy area. Just like I fucking predicted, he catches me from the corner of his eye, requesting the driver to stop, and starts getting ready to leave too. I'm slow to a light, and so is he. I look at him, and he's already looking at me. Since the stop is directly in front of a train station, I prayed that he was just going to walk in there, and that all of this was just a misunderstanding. Nope. There's a good distance between us on the street, but he puts his bag down, pretends to rummage through them, but still has his eyes on me. I stay where I am, partly because another bus at the same stop was going to come soon, that'd take me closer to my destination, and partly to watch him from the corner of my eye. A couple of minutes passed and he walked away. I noticed him getting on the streetcar, a block down, and I could finally breathe. I see my bus coming and I'm just so fucking relieved. I look back in his direction one last time and notice that he got off the streetcar and was just standing there. I hurry into the bus and pray that he doesn't make a good run to get in. He doesn't, and I get to my destination safely, even though the bus driver completely skips over my stop for some reason, but whatever, as long as he isn't following me anymore. So yeah, random guy, let's never meet again. This happened between the ages of 13 and 16. I'm 26 now, but I still remember it vividly. When I was in the 8th grade, my friend Jenny and I were messing around during PE, and our teacher was getting irritated that we weren't paying attention or doing what we were supposed to do, so he separated us. Before we parted ways, I handed her my phone and told her to give me her number. She quickly put it in, and I put my phone back in my sweat pockets and went to the other side of the gym. I texted her, "Hey, it's my name," and a picture of me making a face, and she replied a couple of minutes later. We were talking back and forth for a couple of minutes before I said something I thought was hilarious, and looked up to watch her read my text and burst out laughing. That was when I got a response, without Jenny ever looking at her phone. Who was I texting? I replied asking who I was texting to, and they never responded. After class ended, I walked up to Jenny and asked her what her number was. She told me her number, and the number I had in my phone was off by 1 digit. The person never texted me back, so I ultimately forgot about it. A couple of days later, I was standing outside of my school talking to my friends when I got a text from the number. "You look good in blue," it said. "Who is this?" I asked. "Jenny." It wasn't Jenny. I looked around, but amongst all the cars and kids, I couldn't even begin to imagine where the person who was texting me was. I was wearing a blue shirt that day, but I didn't really get creeped out by it, because being a 13-year-old teenager, I didn't really realize the severity of how weird that was. So for a couple of years, I would randomly get text messages from this person, who I found out was a man, telling me he loved me, and telling me he was going to make me his one day, and things like that. I never told my mum about it, because again, I didn't really realize the severity of it. That was until something happened when I turned 16. One day after school in my sophomore year, I was sitting on my couch watching TV, and my phone chimed. It was a picture message from a number I didn't have saved in my phone. I opened it and it was a picture of a male's private area. I yelled "ew" and threw my phone. A couple of seconds later, my phone chimed again. I picked it up and it was a picture of a big Hispanic man coming from the same number. I showed my mum's boyfriend at the time and he called my mum to come home. When my mum got home, I showed her the pictures and told her everything. Of course, she was angry at me for not telling her years ago when this all started, but I just apologized and she told me it wasn't my fault and that we were going to the police. So I get to the police station to file a report. The officer, who shall remain unnamed, in short, did nothing. He ran the number and told us this number is from the town over, so technically out of our jurisdiction. My mum asked if we should go to that town over and file a report, and he said no, and that he would call him. This is how the conversation went between the officer and the man. "Hello, this is Officer Blank from my town police department. Have you been sending pictures to a young girl?" "No habla inglés." "Oh, okay, sorry." That was it. That was the whole confrontation. My mum was livid. She lost her mind on this officer. I don't even remember most of what she said, except for that it was very loud. There were lots of cussing, and the officer was scared. He looked at my mum and told her, "Look, he hasn't ever showed up in person, and if he doesn't live in town, my suggestion is to just block the number." My mum, dissatisfied with the answer, grabbed me and left. We were going to the next town over's police department. Yes, he was right. I had never seen him in person, but he had seen me in person. He knew things like where I was and what I was wearing, and had been texting me for years. On the way to the police department, he called. My mum pulled over and grabbed my phone. Hello? Hello? Where is my name? This is her mother, you sick fuck. He started laughing and then told her, she is mine. I'm going to take her away from you and make her my wife. You can't stop me. My mum started screaming, I'll fucking kill you, you coward. The whole time he just laughed at her while my mum yelled and I started crying. After he hung up, my mum called the police again, and they told us there was nothing they could do and to just block him. Luckily, that was the last time I'd ever heard from him. This was 10 years ago, and I still think about it all the time. I have a daughter who I worry about things like this will happen to, or that man coming back one day and targeting her or something. Sorry I didn't have some crazy climactic ending, but it's still something that makes me nervous even to this day. I've never seen him in person, but the fact that he has seen me and knew I went to school, who knows if he's still out there, or if he really did give up. All I know is I hope I never meet him.